Good afternoon. Today's brief is going to be covering the organizational design, structure, and change of an organization that the briefer is currently working at. And we are going to cover the following topics. We're going to be covering the organization itself, major issues and identified dimensions in accordance with the Forbes 8 topics that it ranks on, the ramifications and consequences of the area that this organization is currently struggling with, how the organizational structure has an influence on the overall organization effectiveness, an analysis on conscious culture in accordance with this organization, a presented plan for change to resolve this issue, an analysis on the challenges for actually implementing the change, as well as connecting a lessons learned on the important pieces that we have covered and what we need to keep in mind when making changes in the future within our organizations. So firstly, the organization in question is going to be one that the presenter, being myself, currently works at. To avoid giving a specific name for the organization, I will be referring to this organization as the Science Corp throughout the rest of the brief. This is a organization that is currently a defense contractor working within the Department of Defense. So major issues in the identified dimension as accordance with Forbes. So currently, this organization, as well as many other DoD organizations, are facing budget cuts and mass layoffs in accordance with the government policies that are being put out. So most recent example being 5,400 DoD workers who were cut in the last week, which Dorn and Bohan discuss in their 2025 article. So this is raising a lot of concerns amongst employees who are currently resulting in a rise of ambiguity and confusion within the workforce. The area that Science Corp is currently struggling with, in accordance with the Forbes 8 dimensions, is people management, and more specifically, people management as it refers to transparency and communication within the organization. As research by Burhan and colleagues tells us, transparency is extremely important in the building of relationships, trust, and a completely motivated workforce, and one that is dedicated to the organization itself. So, open communication and transparency can result in a number of positive benefits, as Burhan discusses. It's been shown to increase relationships, increase trust between the employees of the organization and the management aspect themselves, as well as to ease ambiguity and confusion, even in uncertain times when the news may not be good. Transparency has been shown to at least ease concerns amongst employees. Unfortunately, the Science Corp has decided on a more passive and reactionary approach to this information. So, as you could probably assume, this is resulting in an increasing amount of ambiguity within the workforce, a number of worried employees who do not know how to plan for the future, as well as a low trust environment where the workers within the organization feel as though they are not being told the full truth by upper management. So, effective personal management skills should be put into place. Transparency has been proven effective, even with negative news, in accordance with Griffin. So even if the news isn't always positive, employees still like to be informed on what is happening, so that way they can plan better, and that way they at least know there isn't information that is currently being hidden from them. In doing so, that ultimately increases trust between management and the workforce, creating a much more pleasant workplace environment. Potential ramifications of this low transparency, as we had currently discussed in the last slide, this could result in lowered workforce effectiveness, overall lowered motivation within the workforce, which is then going to result in a lowered organizational commitment. Each of these have a large impact on the way the organization is going to complete work moving forward, which is ultimately going to impact organizational effectiveness of the entirety of Science Corp. So it's important to understand how the structure of the organization has an overall impact on the effectiveness. So currently, the Science Corp is built around a organizational culture of one that determines the overall organizational effectiveness. It impacts the communication patterns, and it also impacts the personal management techniques currently used. Um, our goal within the Science Corp is to provide innovative technology solutions for the government customer, respond quickly to change as changes happen very quickly and rapidly within a technology focused industry, as well as to provide the best products to the warfighter and the government. Um, so those are the tenets that kind of guide our organizational principles. Um, the current organizational structure of Science Corp is based around a matrix style organization. So, meaning that employees in this organization both report to a functional manager as well as a project team. We are mainly formulated around Scrum teams. What this really means is, as Griffin explains, is employees report to a functional manager, but they are also assigned to a Scrum team that has a specific role within the organization, meaning they work on specific products that then get delivered to the customer. So this is a multi-tiered hierarchy. So managers have their own team of about 6 to 8 individuals. And then those managers also report to either their own manager, who then has their own team of about 6 to 8 individuals. So this has a impact on how the individuals actually report and who and how the communication flows. Um, so there are a couple positives and a couple negatives to this current organizational approach. The positives here being that they enable decision making to happen at much lower levels. So the individual project managers that are in charge of each team or each Scrum team, they have the ability to make decisions up to a certain point before having to go to their next manager. So that also enables flexibility and adaptability as these government customers ask for requests and changes in the product lineup. However, this organizational structure also has a couple of negatives in regards to communication and personnel management. Um, so, with the large number of hierarchies in different structures, communication hangups are common, as suggested by Griffin, with many organizations in the same style. So there does happen to be a couple communication hangups that have been noted at senior levels, being senior program managers and the director level. Um, so this lack of communication is kind of leading into some of these personal management issues with regards to the perceived lack of transparency due to low communication flow. So, in addition to the hierarchy and organizational structure, it is important to take a look at how conscious culture plays a role in the Science Corp as a whole. Um, so conscious culture is largely one that is founded on ethicality, trust, and open communication, and also focuses on the overall well-being of the worker and making it an environment where the worker feels that they are safe, comfortable, and supported, as Dion explains. But this also requires a high degree of conscious leadership in order to foster this type of conscious culture. So these types of conscious leaders focus on the employee themselves, focus on leadership that's going to guide and mentor these employees, as well as provide a vision for them to work towards, um, as well as acting in an ethical manner and leading by example. Um, and overall, and most importantly, this is focused on creating trust and collaboration within the team. So overall, Science Corp does a very good job at prioritizing a conscious culture. We provide a large focus on providing support to the government customer, a large support on military focus, and a large support on veterans. Our organization is made up of about 50 to 60% of veterans, and this is kind of seen within the introduction and inclusion of a number of different programs to foster inclusion within the workforce. These include individual working groups, training programs, and pretty regular visits by the CEO and division senior vice president branch to discuss how our organization is moving forward and working towards that vision that I had discussed a couple slides previously about building innovative solutions for the government and military customer and providing the best support that we can. However, we do lack a little bit of the conscious leadership that's going to be required in order to foster this conscious culture. So this is due to a lowered trust, a lowered amount of trust due to the lack of open communication, which we had discussed in previous slides. Is some of this communication doesn't always flow down the hierarchy levels to the individual workers. This kind of results in a perceived lack of transparency and trust. And there's also a lack of leading by example. So if we want to foster this organizational culture founded on conscious culture, we need to also make sure our leaders are our leaders are acting with conscious leadership principles in mind, and some of those being the fostering of open communication and transparency within their culture and organization. So now that we have identified the main issue within the organization, we're going to present a plan based on Kotter's 8 steps. So obviously laid out by Kotter on their Kotter Inc. page in 2025. This first step is going to be creating a sense of urgency. So informing upper management on the current issue, as well as highlighting the potential ramifications of low transparency that we had discussed before. So as we've discussed in previous slides, explaining to the upper management that this lack of perceived transparency can result in a loss of motivation, high amount of ambiguity and confusion, leading to a number of potential mistakes within the workflow, as well as lower performance due to lack of motivation and lack of organizational commitment, as Burhan discusses. After creating that sense of urgency and explaining to the leadership as to why we need to make a change, it is important to next build a guiding coalition. So we're going to be putting together a team to help us build this vision and help us build our reason or why as to why we need to make this change, and making that clear to the leadership here. So we want to make sure to include individuals from across the organization on this initial council. So a couple of key players throughout the organization to help us, one, identify issues, but also two, increase buy-in as if multiple members of the organization are involved, you can get a higher buy-in as they'll feel like they are actually contributing to the solution, not just being told what to do on the back end. Our next step is going to be actually forming a vision, as Kotter explains. So our goal here is to identify the goal and the why behind the change, and putting the pen to paper and actually creating what we want to do here. So our overall vision here is to foster a culture based on transparency to increase trust from upper management, and build trust with that lower leadership level to help us provide the best products possible for the customer. Then once a vision is established, you want to enlist a group of volunteers to help us make this change. So we're going to be looking again for key volunteers within the organization at all levels. So we want to include members from senior organization to members in the individual level to members in production, across the entirety of the organization, to help increase that buy-in, to make people feel as though they're helping to contribute to this change. And again, not just being told what to do or feel like they're being forced into making a change. So next is going to be the removal of common barriers. So as Griffin explained, some pretty common barriers to making changes are those caused by processes and policies of old frameworks, as well as ensuring support from upper management. So we need to make sure there aren't any policies in place from older frameworks that are stopping us from making these changes and stopping us from increasing this current flow, as well as ensuring upper management providing the support. As research shows, this upper management support is key to showing the lower members in the organization that they are also committed to making this change and showing that it's important to make this change. Next, we want to go ahead and make short-term wins, as Kotter explains. So these are going to be small, easily achievable goals. So within our own change framework, we're going to start off by making weekly newsletters that are going to be pushed from the division head to their individual branches, explaining the current news and the current thoughts on the upper management chain. So the individuals, the lower levels, can feel as though their leadership is being transparent and being open with regards to communication. By pushing out these small short-term wins there, we can start to see how this has a ripple effect across the community with increased transparency. From there, we want to keep the foot on the pedal there, and look for more opportunities to enhance transparency. So once we see the success of the weekly newsletter, we're going to move to a news board on the organization's intranet page. and publishing news there. So what we can do there is build out a poll organization as opposed to a push style organization where individuals can log into the internet and pull useful information down instead of having to wait for that weekly newsletter from the division head. From there, we want to make sure we work on embedding these changes into the culture. So we're going to be looking for the positives and conducting some interviews with the employees to see how this information has actually benefited them and made them feel like there is a little more transparency. We're then going to be working on briefing that information to upper management leaders so they can see how they're actually making a positive impact in the organization by moving forward with these types of change, as well as looking for potential reversions back to old ways. So we want to make sure that upper management stays on that. As Griffin explains, a pretty common issue with making changes is reversion back to old ways of doing things. So we'll be meeting with the upper management chain regularly as a part of the coalition to make sure they are still feeling comfortable with the way things are going and explaining the importance of them remaining so. So there are a couple challenges that obviously we will face when we're making these changes. As we've discussed a number of times before, one of this is going to be ensuring upper management stays committed. So how we're going to do that is very similar to the eighth step as discussed above, and identified how the increased transparency is actually benefiting the organization. So as we all know, change requires effort, time, and money, as Griffin explains. So it's pretty important for management to see how the money and effort they're putting in is resulting in positive benefits for them. So kind of showing how that increased transparency is increasing morale, is increasing organizational effectiveness, and is increasing worker effectiveness in the organization is going to be key to making sure that management stays committed to this change. We're also going to be making sure we educate them on the ramifications of low transparency. So we want to discuss to them the high task and role ambiguity caused by this lack of communication, as discussed earlier in this conversation, as well as discussing the potential ramifications of low motivation and organizational loyalty, which is going to make it very difficult for us to continue to provide top of the line support to our customers. Another key piece here is making sure we're taking a systems approach moving forward. So identifying some of these subgroups within the organization, and identifying how each component of the group interacts with each other. And by doing so, we can kind of figure out how information is flowing between each of these subgroups to help us identify potential bottlenecks or potential hangups with the communication there. So that's a key here to move forward when making other changes in the organization. Another challenge we're going to be facing is ensuring communication remains open within these subgroups. So we need to identify where this information is flowing, identify who needs to push the information to make that the most effective, and then identify how each group would benefit most between a push or a pull method. So whether that means these individuals are logging on regularly to the internet page, or maybe they are not, and we can look for better ways to do that, whether that be pushing out of emails or using public boards that are being published in break rooms or inside near the building and frequented hallways and things of that nature. From a lessons learned perspective, I think the three key takeaways here were the importance of taking a systems approach, as Griffin explains. So this kind of helps you take a whole organization and break it out into subcomponents and subgroups and map, and that'll help us map out how communication flows, and how each of these changes we're going to make is make a ripple impact across each of these different groups. So that way we can ensure we're identifying all potential roadblocks or hangups or bottlenecks within communication. It's also important to identify a plan for the removal of roadblocks. The two main roadblocks, as Griffin highlights, being old processes from antiquated frameworks or a lack of management buy-in. So making sure, as we're taking a systems approach, identifying the current processes in place for communication flow, as well as continuing to educate management on the importance of having them continue to buy in and showing the employees in the organization that this is an important change that they can make. And lastly, just ensuring management buy-in. So managers are ultimately responsible for holding the keys for learning, practicing, and teaching culture to employees through a process of organizational socialization. These employees then learn what is acceptable and what is important within the organization to keeping the culture in line with their behaviors. So team members often replicate what they see or what they perceive to be acceptable. So if our management team is not showing the importance of transparency and communication, this could have a ripple effect in the fact that our employees may begin to do the same, which will again impact on a low trust, low transparency environment within the organization. These were the references used throughout the brief if you wanted to look those up. They are listed there for your benefit and your enjoyment. And if there are no questions, we will go ahead and end the brief. Thank you very much for your time.